Here's my little review slash analysis of The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. As a longtime fan of Fyodor Dostoevsky, I was a little nervous going into this because The Brother Karamazov was such a good book and set such a high standard for me in terms of literature that I was kind of nervous but also equally excited to go into this book. In all honesty, in the entirety of this book, it was a little difficult to stay thoroughly engaged with the entire book in terms of its pacing because the pacing was a little awkward and there's a lot of characters that are introduced in this book. And for those who haven't read this before, it's broken down into 4 parts. The first part, I liked. It was a very steady linear narrative with a nice build-up that kind of left this cliffhanger leading up to the second and third part. And for those second and third parts, they were a little awkward. The pacing would be really hyper, so you get something like Ippolit's speech, something really intense, and then you get to like a really dry scene for like the next 50 pages. So that part wasn't too fun, but once I got to the 4th part, I was so happy that I stuck with the book because that was one of the best endings to a book I've ever read. So now with that minor critique aside, I can say that the ending was devastating, was one of the saddest things I've ever read. And I'm glad that I didn't get anything spoiled to me before I read the book, and I had no expectations whatsoever of what was going to happen to Mishkin with Nastasia, Rogozin, all those characters. I also want to preface this review with my thoughts on Mishkin. So I knew going into the book that the general basis of the plot is him navigating late 19th century St. Petersburg, Russia, and just the cold, harsh environment. And the people that he's encountering are all just really selfish, really, just really not great people to be around. And I was hoping that Mishkin, as the symbol of unconditional kindness and generosity that he is, would be able to change the hearts of people. I guess that's just me being an optimist, that some people would learn just from the way Mishkin treats people, that they would in turn be like maybe having a change of heart in a sense. But knowing Dostoevsky, I instead got none of that. So we see Rogozin almost try to kill Mishkin. We see him getting clowned on for proposing to Nastasia. We see him almost getting his inheritance taken away by, what's his name, Brodovsky, I think. Just a lot of unfortunate things. And then ultimately at the end, despite all his best efforts and his pure heart, he ends up in some type of vegetative state, I want to say. He's sent away to an asylum where he basically can't speak and is just left there, and he only gets like 1 visitor. So essentially what I got from this is Mishkin is a symbol of virtue, of innocence, of a pure heart, and Dostoevsky makes it very clear that he's a very out-of-place person within this society, and we essentially see him not really change his heart, but he's essentially chewed up and spat out by the society towards the end of the book. Literally after the ending, I sat in bed for like a half hour trying to go to sleep, but I was just contemplating like whether any of Mishkin's attempts at trying to spread kindness and spread beauty to the world was just ultimately amounting to nothing at the end. Another interpretation that I looked up that I didn't really think until I researched it was that he is a symbol of Christ, which would make a lot of sense considering his kindness is mocked. He is very much alienated from the rest of society, and at the end, he is killed. I will say, though, there were several times throughout the novel that I was conflicted with Mishkin's choices, not as an attack on his character, but he would make a decision and I'd just be like, why are you doing that? I will say I was also conflicted with some of Mishkin's choices, specifically when it comes to relationships. So at the end of part 1, he proposes to Nastasia, but not really out of a romantic love type of sense, but more so out of pity. And then he goes off to propose to Aglaya after he finds out Nastasia runs off with Rogozin. And then after that, when Nastasia and Aglaya meet up, he switches back to Nastasia. But in the end, Rogozin kills Nastasia anyway, so Mishkin ends up with nobody. So overall, I saw Mishkin's inability to choose between the 2 women as a kind thing because he loves both of them so much, but in different ways. But it also kind of makes him an idiot because he can't choose between the 2 of them. So I see Mishkin's love for Nastasia as sort of like a pity love, where Nastasia has such a difficult upbringing that she can't seem to accept a healthy version of love, and Mishkin can be that version of it. But I think it's ultimately up to Nastasia whether she feels that she is worthy to accept that love that Mishkin has for her. So I think ultimately, with time and patience, Nastasia would have been able to get along with Mishkin. But really, yeah, it is ultimately up to Nastasia whether she's going to accept that love or reject it. But he loves Aglaya in a sort of romantic sense, where you see 2 young, attractive people eventually spend more time together, get to know each other a little bit more, and then want to end up having some type of long-term relationship as a result. but Mishkin did end up hurting a lot of Aglaya's family towards the end of the book because he was unable to sit down and settle with Aglaya and ended up choosing Nastasia at the end. So did Mishkin make the right choice in ultimately going for Nastasia? I would say so, yeah. I would say just because of the person that Mishkin is, and because of his nature, I feel like it was gonna happen. If he were going along with the theory that he is more of like a Christ-like figure, then it would be him setting down his romantic love for Aglaya and instead having almost a sacrificial love to save Nastasia. All right, so leaving aside the love triangle story, I wanted to talk about the ending and what I thought it meant. So right along with the theory that Mishkin is the embodiment of goodness and beauty and purity, I think Dostoevsky was trying to ultimately show just how depraved Russian society was at this time that he was writing this, and any attempt to show some type of kindness and beauty into that society was ultimately a failure at the end. I think Rogozin's character is sort of a representative of the common man in Russia, and he is someone who's wildly passionate, who is very violent and destructive, and reflects, I guess, some of the people that Dostoevsky met every day in society. And another thing that I noticed from beginning to the ending of the novel, Mishkin is always trying to make peace with Rogozin, but in every single attempt that he does so, he ultimately fails. And what frustrated me so much in the end specifically is that whenever the whole big reveal happens with Nastasia's death, Mishkin, obviously, and understandably so, is in shock, but he goes and pets Rogozin's head as a sort of it's okay sort of thing, sort of like a comforting thing, which I thought was I'd be throwing hands if that happened. You killed my fiance, and yeah, I would have been a very violent person, specifically in that scene. So I don't know if it was cowardice or it was a very powerful sign of compassion, but what Mishkin did towards the end, I was just I wouldn't do that. So overall, this was a difficult read in terms of the pacing, but at the end it was a very rewarding process, and a lot of times throughout the book it made me reflect on a lot of things about myself and what I see in other people, and I would definitely recommend this to honestly anybody. There's just a little bit of tough wording to get through because this is obviously originally in Russian and so it was translated, and so some of the stuff is a little bit to follow, but if you just stick through it, I promise you towards the end it'll be worth the read.